I fear that the number one issue in Washington during the meetings will be watching Joe Biden and see how he performs. I mean, that is the bizarre.
Let's speak now to the former Prime Minister of Sweden and, of course, a former diplomat, Conservative Prime Minister he was, Carl Bildt. Carl Bildt, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Pleasure, as always.
Yeah, very nice to speak to you. I mean, first of all, what's your reaction to the election of Keir Starmer? Do you see this, as some in Labour are saying, as Britain sort of reconnecting with the rest of the world after Brexit?
Well, that remains to be seen. I was surprised by the fact that when I tried to follow as much as I could the UK election campaign, I mean, the issue of Brexit wasn't mentioned, which is sort of the big thing that has happened, that has transformed the politics of the UK and certainly has transformed the position of the UK in the world and raised quite a number of different questions for the future. It was a non-issue in the election campaign. But let's see what happens. It's fairly obvious that sort of the incoming government doesn't have the sort of the hang-ups of the Conservatives when it comes to Europe.
Of course, Sweden now has joined NATO. That is because of the threat from Russia. What are you hoping will come out of this 75th summit as far as Ukraine and Russia is concerned, or policy towards it?
Well, I fear that the number one issue in Washington during the meetings will be watching Joe Biden and see how he performs. I mean, that is the bizarre fact of where we are at the moment in the US politics. But as to your question, there's going to be a lot of questions, Ukraine membership of NATO or not. And some of the Ukrainians and some of the Central Europeans are going to be disappointed that no concrete decision is going to be taken. I think the Biden administration would be keen to present it as what they call a bridge to NATO membership further on. Hopefully that will happen. But then I think the key thing is going to be the concrete commitment to the security of Ukraine that will be coming from the different member states of different sorts, be that sort of verbal assurances or be that more concrete commitment in terms of hardware or money.
Is there anything that NATO can do, as it were, to future test it against the possibility of a return of Donald Trump?
Well, everyone will be discussing that in the corridors, but in my humble opinion, the answer is no. Donald Trump is a fairly unpredictable entity. There's a lot of speculation what it would mean, what kind of Ukraine policy, what kind of Russia policy he would pursue. There's no way of knowing that until he's in office, which unfortunately is increasingly likely. So we Europeans have to be prepared for different contingencies and have to be prepared to perhaps, or most certainly, take a larger share of the burden ourselves.
Where do you think, I know you follow it very closely, where do you think this conflict in Ukraine is headed?
I think it's headed for another year of conflict, for a start. There is talk about sort of a possible ceasefire and whatever. I don't see any one of them, either on the one or the other side, ready for that. Mr. Putin went out and talked about his readiness for a ceasefire, provided that Ukraine de facto capitulated before even a ceasefire. So that wasn't much of an offer. I think everyone is expecting primarily what's going to happen in Washington. And needless to say, what happens in the battlefield. But if we assume that there's not going to be any major dramatic changes in the battlefield, then it's a question of waiting for Washington and then take it from there.
Are you worried that some European members, I mean, one thinks of France, for example, are possibly going to become less steadfast in their support for Ukraine?
Well, yes and no. I've been surprised, positively surprised, as to be said, by how public opinion has been holding up throughout Europe. We, the European Council on Foreign Relations, have done opinion polls over, well, a couple of them, big ones over the years. And the last one, which was out a couple of weeks ago, is surprisingly in the very strong support for helping Ukraine in different ways in virtually every country. I mean, there's some shades, needless to say, but less so. But then it's a question: what will the new Dutch government do? What will the new French government do? what is Mr. Orban up to? But I'm slightly more optimistic than I was 6 months ago.
Are you pleased that former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte is taking over NATO? Is he going to be a good Secretary General, do you think?
I think he's a steady hand. He's been Prime Minister now for not quite forever. Is it 12 or 14 years or something like that? He knows everyone. The test will be, of course, his sort of Trump handling abilities. Jens Stoltenberg, the outgoing Secretary General, was extremely good at handling the Trump one, which was not an easy thing to do. And Mark Rutte was around in that time as well. No, I think he was as good a choice as could be made.
Now, you mentioned that probably everyone's just going to be looking at Joe Biden and his demeanour and seeing what he's like during these meetings. How do you think the other leaders should react? Because they're bound to be asked that question. Should they express an honest opinion, or does the kind of politeness of guests come first?
Oh, the politeness of guests come first. I mean, they are going to be, I think, distinctly uncomfortable with the entire issue.
Later on Tuesday, I shall set off to Washington for the NATO summit. I've already had a number of international calls, as you will know, and as you would have expected, to establish the relations across with other countries, to have really important discussions about Ukraine and other pressing issues. And Washington will be an opportunity for me to have further discussions with some of the leaders I've already spoken to and some that I'm due to speak to. It is, of course, an important summit on NATO. It is, for me, to be absolutely clear that the first duty of my government is security and defence, to make clear our unshakable support of NATO, and, of course, to reiterate, as I did to President Zelensky yesterday, the support that we will have in this country and with our allies towards Ukraine. So this will be a politics and a government that is about delivery, is about service. Self-interest is yesterday's politics. I want a politics and a country that works for you.